Well, it is 7 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started 7 o'clock Eastern time. Good evening and welcome to the Midwest Clinic's webinar on the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund. Our panelists will help demystify the federal relief funds being made available to help schools implement safer reopening measures and address the academic, social, and emotional needs of our students. My name is Kelly Bryan, and I'm the Executive Director of the Midwest Clinic. A couple of housekeeping items before we begin. If you'd like to let us know where you're from, go ahead and post that in the chat. We'd love to see where everybody is hailing from that's joining us this evening. Also, we are excited to announce that the Midwest Clinic will be returning to Chicago this December for a live event. Please follow us on social media and visit our website for more important information and announcements and updates about our 75th conference. Tonight's webinar is going to be recorded and will be made available on our website following this evening's presentation. Also, the last 15 minutes of this evening's presentation is reserved for a Q&A segment. Please post your questions in the chat. If you're interested in a particular question that has been posted, you can upvote that question. We will try to answer the questions with the most upvotes first. And then lastly, we have a Google Drive with a lot of additional information and resources that are available to you. We will post a link to the drive in the chat and also make it available on our website following this evening's presentation. So I'd like to take a moment and introduce our panelists for this evening's presentation. First, we have Mary Luehrsen, who's the Director of Public Affairs and Government Relations for NAMM, the National Association of Music Merchants, and also the Executive Director of the NAMM Foundation. Mary will provide an overview of the various funding streams and how they may be applicable to our programs. Next, we have Bob Morrison, who's founder and CEO of Quadrant Research, the nation's preeminent arts education, data analytics, and market research firm. Bob will discuss examples of state and district allocations, as well as acceptable uses for these funds. And then lastly, we have Marcia Neel, who is the Senior Director of Education at Yamaha Corporation of America and former Secondary Fine Arts Coordinator for the Clark County School District in Las Vegas, Nevada. Marcia will focus on how educators can become involved in the process of procuring these funds for music and arts programs, as well as provide real-life examples of how these funds are already being used in various districts across the country. And also, I'll be joined this evening by Midwest board member Lisa McDonald. She'll be helping me in the background. But without further ado, I'd now like to hand it over to Mary Luehrsen to start this evening's presentation. Mary.
Thank you so much, Kelly and Lisa, Midwest Clinic board member, and to the whole board and team at the Midwest Clinic. Thank you so very much for the opportunity to be with you. I can see that we've just posted the link to the Google Drive where you can find all of this information that'll be available to you. So first of all, I hope that this finds you doing well. I know this has been a pretty extraordinary year for you, your family, your colleagues, as you have done the noble work of transferring your work to the online environment for the most part, and not everywhere, but for the most part, have been a combination of online, hybrid, and now turning back to in-person. We know also that you probably haven't had that grand experience of that remarkable ensemble sound that we know fuels you and is the essence of your great creativity and the work that you do with students. And we hope that that is part of your life soon. And most of all, we thank you for the great work that you've done for students everywhere. Really, really important as we've stuck together as music educator lovers, supporters, advocates, and for you, the teacher working with students every day. So thank you. I want to give you a quick overview of these relief fund packages that have come from our federal government. I want to give you some context and a lot of information is going to come at you. It feels a little bit like a fire hose, but don't worry, kind of take it all in. As it accumulates, I think it'll make sense. So I want to give you first an overview. The first slide is a quick overview. I just want to be sure that I'm seeing the slide here somewhere myself, which I'm not right now, not anyone's fault, but my own. The total relief package that we've gotten in the last year is 5.3 trillion. And what is this equivalent? In some comparison, this is more than $43,000 per household in actual real stimulus funding that are coming forward. As we compare this in 2020 dollars, the cost of World War II for our country was $4 trillion. That's adjusted for inflation over a 4-year period. So when you ask, is this significant? This is significant. And we are also, because of the stimulus and relief fundings, we're projecting quite a dramatic growth through the remainder of this year at 6% economic growth. I think that fluctuates month to month with 3 million new jobs. So we're already hearing in some sectors of difficulty in hiring qualified personnel. Kind of keep your ear to that, because that's part of the reality of an economy that is moving up. It's also very popular politically. 75% is received 75% approval for us to invest in these relief funding. 63% of lower income Republicans and 46% of Republicans overall support it. I include that Republican number just as a reminder that these relief funds were passed by our Congress in pretty much a on the Democrat side. The Republicans did not join with the Democrats in advancing these funds. But even though there's popular support for it within the rank and file. So how much have we gotten for education? That's this very important next graph. A year ago, March 2020, we received 30 million, of which 13, you can see the numbers yourself, 13.2 billion was allocated for K-12. In December, just before the year ended, 54 billion was allocated in K-12, and March, just this last March, a few weeks ago, 126 billion for K-12. You have the other numbers there for higher ed, and also for governors are given discretionary funds for them to actually have some education initiatives in their states. Now, I know in the education sector, when we talk about money, it's always like, oh, well, you'll give me this much money, or you'll give me the choice to use my money this way, but that means I can't use the money the other way because funds are limited, and you're going to kind of, always have to make choices down a narrow path. This is all new money. This is not state education money. That is also in the pipeline from the states. This is not local funding. This is new federal relief funding. And I think that's very important to put that into the context. So let's take a look at the 168 billion, the one that just came through in March. And I want to get you used to some terms here. When we say 126 billion for K-12 going to state education agencies, that is your State Department of Education. And if you don't know anyone in your State Department of Education, either through your State Music Education Association or your Band Directors Association, it's a good time to make sure you know someone there. Either a CDA director, the State Education Agency's Director of Arts Education, they have a website, cda.org, we can find that for you, or some way that you can work with your principal and school administration to, at the right time and the right way, have that communication to the State Education Department. You can see also that there's the Governor's Fund and the higher ed. And it's important to know, if you have friends in higher ed, that they know this is funding coming as well. So next slide, looking at the K-12 funding. Again, getting used to some of the language that you will hear as we talk about these funds. The funds are going to be allocated to the states and then to the school districts. And the school, because you will often hear the term local education agencies. It's just a school district, okay? They use that term. It's a term for school district. The allocation of money is going to follow the formula for Title I funding. That doesn't mean that the funds have to be used for Title I restricted funding, as they always are. It's following the funding. And the shorthand for that is, the larger your Title I allocation for a school district, the more funds you're going to get from the allocation from the State Education Department. I think it's very important to understand that, because what you're currently getting in Title I funding is probably available on your district's website. So you can already start making some calculations. And we know music and math are highly correlated. So you probably are pretty good at that. The state education, there's some rules around this. Money has to, 90% of the money coming to the state has to move to the districts. 10% is retained in the State Department, the State Education Department. So there is some flexibility around programming. All right, so here's where we get into, before I pass it over to Bob in a few minutes, who's really's got a great handle on how these funds can use. A quick overview. These funds can be used. Plans need to be developed by districts for these funds. The funds can be used up until September 30th, 2023. There's already some concern that with the use of these funds will sort of sunset, and then the funding goes back to state and local. Well, that's part of your planning, I believe. It's very important to think of that. And that there is 20% of these funds need to address learning loss, evidence-based interventions like music education, and to address students' academic, social, and emotional needs. And the social and emotional needs is very, very important part of what we are concerned about as students come back to school, get used to being in school again, and all the important work that they do together. There are some stipulations about states needing to set aside for learning loss and this summer enrichment programming, which is, I think, also very interesting for what we are really interested in. I'm just going to skim over the next couple of slides. Again, sharing it with you to that you understand the scale of this funding, that another 40 billion is going to colleges and universities, not to replace state funding, not to replace tuition, but additional. Again, I think probably you're kind of getting the drift about what the meaning of these funds are. The other allocations in the next slide, that we know that the first CARES funding from March 2020 and a little bit from December 2020 was used for technology for online learning. We know a great deal of those funds, and for PPE. A great deal of the funding was used for that, but it will continue under an E-rate subsidy for even more expansion of broadband and access to internet. And also, just an FYI, they included the National Endowments for the Arts and all our local arts organizations that are so important. I also included a little bit here about the next slide, childcare and Head Start. We know that our communities and our families, your families of students, may rely on these programs. And I think it's important for you, again, to see that the comprehensive reality of these funds. Now, after education, this next slide is kind of my favorite part, because you think of all the money coming to a state, to a state education department, 90% going to a local school district, more is going to the state government itself and to local government. And I think this is very important for us to understand that this assistance is going directly to states, and in many instances is being used to recover deficits or other areas of pressure within the state budget. And I think it's going to be very interesting to watch these funds that are coming through. And almost my favorite is on the next slide is the money that's going directly to counties. And there's a website at the bottom of that slide that gives you a county by county allocation of the funds that will go directly to counties. And this is where we could see our local performing arts organizations, our local cultural organizations, cultural arts councils get some funding to actually bolster their offerings and support. And the last one, I think I'm approaching last, almost last, is what's going to local fiscal recovery. And this is going right to non-county municipalities and counties and cities, small cities. So I affectionately kind of call this the new fire truck clause, because there could be some very interesting infrastructures to help municipalities come up for health and safety for their communities, But again, very, very important funding that our county associations are watching very closely. And you know, where you live, it's important for you to know that these things are occurring. And then we go to the last slide before I kick it over to Bob. There is the coronavirus capital projects funds and local assistance and tribal consistency. And this will help with, again, rural broadband infrastructure, and our tribal governments and neighbors. And you can see all based on population, distributed based on these data from these within these groups. So it's a lot. And it's a tremendous amount of investment in the education sector, and very important for what we care about in terms of access and opportunity for every student to have this robust and rich music learning experience. And so with that, I'm going to flip it over to Bob Morrison, who has his finger on the pulse, not only in terms of our national data, arts education data, but also in his role as a school board member in New Jersey, and also leading the New Jersey School Board Association and leading the New Jersey Arts Education Alliance. So with that great expertise, I turn you over to him.
Thank you, Mary. I appreciate that. And as you can tell, you know, Mary's really painted the overview on the scope of this particular initiative and all the funds that are coming in. And before I move on, I just wanted to do a hat tip to Mary and everyone at NAMM and their government affairs team, because they've been in the middle of this in Washington, making sure that music and the arts have been included in all of these programs, meeting with the Department of Education, meeting with members of Congress and both the Senate and the House, and interfacing with the Biden administration. We're fortunate to have their leadership in Washington to make sure that our interests are being served when these conversations around how to spend all this money are occurring. So let's take it from the federal level down to a state level. And we're going to talk about it from the standpoint of the state of New Jersey. So I'm going to break down some of the recent funding as it related to the state of New Jersey. And as Mary mentioned, you know, 90% is going to the school district, 10% of the state. The state then has a 10% reserve that they can then use for particular programs. In the state of New Jersey, they've broken that reserve up between what they're calling learning acceleration and mental health, including social emotional wellness and learning for students. So our allocation at the district level is for $1.1 billion going to our individual school districts. This is just from ESSER 2. I'll get through the others in a moment. The learning acceleration is getting $75 million. And then there's $30 million to address mental health. And the way then that this looks, if you look at the CARES 1, ESSER 2, and the American Rescue Plan, which is the third bucket of money from just this past March, you can see how the funds have increased. But the bottom line for the state of New Jersey is there's $4.3 billion in new funding going into public education in the state of New Jersey. That's an incredible amount of money. And the story is the same for states all across the country. And when we look at how it breaks down for individual districts, this is a snapshot of what the allocations look like for a school district in New Jersey. You'll see there's their ESSER 2 allocation, and then they get a bucket of money for learning acceleration, and then there's $45,000 per district for their mental health supports and services. So it's important to understand every state is a little bit different on how they're using that 10%. And in the Google Drive that we've set up for you, there are links to how you can find out what's the amount for your state, and then links to your state Department of Education, which is where you will find all the information regarding your state allocations to your district and any special initiatives that they've used for the 10% set aside. Now, one of the most important things to remember is that the formula for allocating the funding is based on Title I, based on the way they fund Title I. It's not governed by Title I regulations. And this is really important to understand because we've heard from some people that superintendents have said, no, we can't use this for music. We can't use this for other programs. We have to use it for Title I. No, its formula is based on Title I, but it's not governed by Title I, which brings us to how may ESSER funds be used then? And it's important to understand that the federal government and the State Department or the U.S. Department of Education has put out 15 areas of guidance for the support of or for the use of these funds. And we're going to walk through each of these 15 so you understand them and then look at how this applies to music programs. So the first one is number one is any activity authorized by ESEA of 1965, including the Native Hawaiian Education Act, the Alaska Native Education Equity Support and Assistance Act, the Individuals with Disabilities Act, the Adult Education Family Literacy Act, the Carl D. Perkins Career and Technical Education Act of 2006, or Subtitle B of Title VII of the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act 42 USC 11431 et sequire. So, what does all that mean? That means that's every federal education bucket that there is. So any activity authorized by any of these bills, by any of this legislation, the funds can be used for. So simple as that. Just think about it in those terms. Area 2, coordination of the preparedness and response efforts of local educational agencies with state, local, tribal, and territorial public health departments and relevant agencies. This is about being able to coordinate response to the coronavirus and coordinate with entities to prevent, prepare for, and respond to the coronavirus. Now, you may be thinking, well, why are they talking about that now, since it seems like right now we're preparing to open our schools and come back into session? Well, the reason is that these funds actually can be used for things even prior to today, really dating back to March 13th of 2021. That's the magic date. From that date forward, if you had had an expenditure that is related to this category, you can apply for those funds to be used to reimburse for that expenditure. So that's why some of these things are looking backward while also looking forward. Number 3, providing principals and school leaders with the resources necessary to address the needs of their individual schools. Pretty broad, right? What does a principal or school leader need to support the needs of their individual schools? Well, right now, there are a lot of different needs. And it's up to the principal to determine what those needs are, how the funds can be utilized, and how it relates to the coronavirus. Activities to address the unique needs of our low-income children, students, children with disabilities, English learners, racial and ethnic minorities, students experiencing homelessness, foster care youth, including how to outreach and service delivery will meet the needs of each population. Just think of it in terms of many of our students being out of school, they needed supplies delivered to them. They were having access issues. They were having connectivity issues. Any activity that was needed to address the unique needs of these special populations, that is covered under this funding. Developing and implementing procedures and systems to improve the preparedness and response efforts of local education agencies. And remember, Mary said local education agency is a school district, right? So having procedures and system in place so that you're prepared for and can respond to different things that happen, like we have to move from hybrid to remote, or we're now moving from hybrid to in-person. And being able to move back and forth, that's all part of preparedness. Being prepared to be able to pivot and switch and change as conditions within the district dictate. Training and professional development for staff and local education agency personnel on sanitation and minimizing the spread of infectious disease. That means training you as educators on what are the protocols you need to have in place in your classroom for sanitation, for cleaning things, for flow of traffic, for hallway flow of traffic, for how the bell schedule is going to be sequenced to, control the traffic flow throughout the schools. This is all training that you as a staff need to go through so that you understand how to adapt to that and how to make adjustments to your program in order to incorporate that. Purchasing supplies to sanitize and clean facilities of a local education agency, and including buildings operated by such agency, meaning schools, right? Supplies to sanitize and clean the facilities, including your spaces, where you're operating for your program. Planning and coordinating and implementing activities during long-term closures, including meals for eligible students and technology for online learning. Again, this ties to the situation that we have been in, where we've been out of school. Students have had connectivity issues. They've needed broadband. They've needed computers. They're on free and reduced lunch, and they were getting their meals at school. And now our school districts had to figure out distribution mechanisms to take meals to students. And that's now all covered under point 8 here. Point 9 is using educational technology, including hardware, software, and connectivity for students who are served by a school district. So this is all the educational tools that you've been using. And by the way, many of them that you're going to continue to use because you found them to be very helpful as you go back and return to your classrooms and begin to welcome your students back. Funds can be used to support those types of purchases, those types of investments in your programs. Providing mental health services and supports. This includes social emotional learning, which Mary touched on, and is going to be critical for us to be able to address in our music rooms, in our arts rooms, as our students return, because they're going to, in many instances, they will have been out of school up to 18 months. And I've already heard from superintendents who are now welcoming students back into their building that the students are, they're eager to be back, but they're also anxious. They're also tentative because it's different. And so when we reopen our schools, as they reopen, and particularly when we come into the fall, it's not going to be like a regular school year. We're not just going to come in, the bells are going to go off and everyone's going to move around. We've got to be able to address the social emotional learning needs of our students. Before they can learn, we need to make them feel safe. We need them to feel welcome. We need to make sure they have a sense of belonging. And it's not until they have that sense will they be able to learn. And that's where we as music educators can address that within our own programs, giving them safe space, giving them the opportunity to express themselves in a way that is meaningful to them. That's a powerful tool that we have in our toolbox, and it's going to be needed now more than ever as we bring our students back. Planning and implementing activities related to summer learning and supplemental after-school programs, including providing class instruction on online learning during the summer months to address the needs of low-income students. So this is where you can have summer camps for music programs. You can have after-school programs that are established where you're bringing in resources. And not only that, as our districts are looking at addressing learning loss, they're setting up, summer camps. So you may be able to say, hey, while you're setting up that camp, we'll provide a music opportunity for those students, because a lot of the camps that are being planned are not just about addressing academic loss, but it's how can they bring students back together. That creates an opportunity for you to work with your other colleagues to say, hey, we'll bring a music component in for this. And the funds are available to help pay for that, to help bring in additional staff and resources to support that. Number 12 is all about addressing learning loss. But remember, learning loss was not just the province of language arts literacy and math. Learning loss cut across everything. And I would argue that if you measured the amount of time that you had with your students over the past year and compared that to a pre-COVID year, you would be able to calculate the amount of time that you lost with your students. Now, remember, there hasn't been any learning loss. Learning's been delayed. That's all that it's been. It's been delayed. So the question is, how do we make up for some of that time? Number 12 addresses some of that with learning acceleration, the summer camps that we talked about, the assessments of students, and being able to track and follow up. Number 13 addresses facility repairs and improvements to enable the operation of the school to reduce the risk of virus transmission and exposure to environmental health hazards. So this is all about how do we improve our school environment. In many schools, they're setting up outdoor stages for musical performances, for concerts, for dance recitals. The costs of setting these things up, of modifying facilities, these funds can be used to support that. Number 14 is all about air quality, ventilation, making sure that we have good ventilation, good filtration in our room, great air change rates in our room so that our environment is safe. If you're in a big old band room and the ventilation isn't great, they can use the funds to put in a standalone air cleaner in your room that will make up for any deficiencies that you have within your own facilities. So 14 is a big one. Ventilation is where a lot of school districts are putting an important focus right now, because that we all know the transmission as a result of aerosols, and ventilation is the #1 way to address that. And the last one, which is my favorite, other activities that are necessary to maintain the operation of and continuity of services in local education agencies and continuing to employ existing staff. So this is the any other thing assigned by your supervisor catch-all phrase. So other activities that are necessary to maintain our operations, but also to continue to employ existing staff. So if someone says, we can't afford to have you here anymore, we've got to cut back, but it's like, but we're getting federal money to pay to keep our staffing in place. So it's important to understand that. So how do these funds apply to music education? I'm just going to give you some highlights, but in the Google Drive, we've got an article that Marcia and I did that is in SBO this month, talking about the use of funds. I've got guidance that NAFME just came out with yesterday in there, as well as guidance that we put out for the state of New Jersey. So here are just a few things to think about. Instruments, supplies, materials to help ensure health and safety of students. This is buying instruments, buying mouthpiece, instruments that are being shared because you can't share instruments anymore. Materials for your classrooms to ensure health and safety, PPE requirements, things of that nature can fall under this area. The PPE, cleaning supplies, sanitation, masks for your instruments, masks for your students, specialized masks, cleaning supplies, puppy pads, things to maintain the space and sanitation. That all comes under areas 3, 5, and 7. Facilities considerations that we talked about, including ventilation, including special staging, including reconfiguration, special cubbies for individual students so that they can keep their materials separated from others. That's in 13, 14, and 15. Instructional support and additional faculty. This is where you can use the funds to bring on, for example, extra faculty because maybe you didn't start as many beginners this year, and maybe you want to have 2 years. You want to run 2 grades of beginning students and you need more faculty. This funding could be used to support that. You want to redevise your curriculum and your lessons so that you can explicitly address social emotional learning needs. That's covered under number 10. Additional instructional support and professional development all falls under this category. Summer programs, like we talked about, either standalone music programs or programs that you embed with other programming that they're doing at the district. That addresses the social emotional learning needs of students. That addresses learning, the learning delay that has occurred in students. So another opportunity to plug in. Planning. We've got to plan for the new year. Have to plan for the fall, have to plan for instructional periods, and money is available to help you plan for all of the things that you need as you prepare to bring your students back. And then other things that, may come up that you think are relevant. You can put them on the table, make them part of the plan that you bring forward on how you can use these funds. But one of the things that I want to point out is I mentioned these guides are available in the Google Drive that we put out there. NAFME's just came out yesterday. We have the one that we put out by Arts Ed New Jersey. Again, connecting the ask for instruments or rental programs for individual students or instrument cleaners. We link the recommendation to the specific guidance to make it easy for you to make the case. But this is really an opportunity to think differently. Right? What have we learned over the past years? The things that we can do, asynchronously, we can do remotely, and the things that we can't do, the things that we can only do in person. And how might we think about new ways to engage more students? This has to be an all hands on deck, everybody in the pool, anyone that wants to play, we let them into play. You want to be in the music program? Come on in. You don't have any experience? I don't care. Come on in. You don't know how to hold a horn? I'll teach you how to hold the horn. Let everybody in. That has to be the goal of this year. And as Mary touched on, again, some of the funding requirements that addressing the social emotional learning needs of students, the comprehensive after school programs, and summer enrichment opportunities, do not overlook these because they are right in front of us right now, these opportunities for you. And the last thing that I'll leave you with is that these use of funds, how a district uses the funds, they must solicit public comment on use of funds. The district must solicit public comment on their plan for how the funds are going to be used, and they must post the plan to the website once it's done within 30 days. So there's a public accountability piece that will allow the public to also weigh in on how these funds are being used. And that can be a key component as part of your strategy on gaining support for the use of funds for your programs. So now I'm going to turn it over to my good friend, Marcia Neel, who I've been working with for over 30 years. I can't even believe it. As we've been advocating on behalf of music education, she is one of the real leaders in the area of recruiting and retention and advocacy. And I'm so grateful that she could join us tonight. And I'm so glad I get to call her my friend. Please welcome Marcia Neel.
Thank you, Bob. I really do appreciate that so much. Talk about all of this. It's just amazing. There's so much information coming down the pike. And what do I do now? Well, you have to learn as much as you possibly can. So let's go ahead and move forward, and we'll see what we can, what we might have access to in the near future. It was very interesting this morning as I opened up my email basket that I happened to see from the Department of Education a whole litany of resources that I hadn't seen before. And of course, one of them was this whole new template that is being sent out to the states for them to complete to get a final allocation of their ARP ESSER money. And so when I looked through that, I was able to find out specifically, because literally this is the form that the state's going to have to use, every state, SEA, as Mary said, to write back to the Fed, this is how we're using the money. And so it's very clear exactly what every LEA, your school district, is being asked to provide in terms of information and how they have to use the dollars. So I'm going to ask Bob at the end of this session to plop that in there as well as another piece of information. If we could go to the next slide, Bob. There we go. So when I say become involved in learning about ESSER funds, please, the first thing you need to do by this weekend is read through all the material that's being provided for you, all right? I know that it's a lot of gobbledygook, a lot of government language, but try to get your hands around it and try to get a handle on it, because you need to understand how these funds come down and how you can use them either in your own building, in your district, in your community. You have to be a part of the process. So there are three things I'm going to talk about in terms of this first becoming knowledgeable piece. And these are the three things right off the top that I would think you would want to know. And the first one is that ESSR funding is all about, and you've heard us say this several times, so I'm going to repeat it again. It is all about planning for a safer return to in-person learning and addressing the needs of the students, including their social, emotional, and mental health needs, particularly those who have been disproportionately impacted. And a number of us are from districts where that has been the case. So this is an opportunity for us to step forward. So that's the first one. The second one, download all these resources, get them done, get them learned over the weekend so that you're ready to start next week to talk to whoever your supervisor is about all of these funds. That's number two. Three, you should know, as Bob said, that because every district is required to solicit input, you need to find out immediately, like call your school board office or look online and see if they have actually had that opportunity for public input. If they have not, then what you want to do is have a meeting of all like-minded people to ensure that they are there to speak up in support of arts education. So often these things go by so quickly, you sort of miss the window, but we can't say it enough. Try to stay up on all the ESSER information that's coming out. Maybe search it in your Twitter, your Facebook feed, and so forth. But these three things are the three things that you should be thinking about right now, just right at the top of your head. And of course, sharing this information with your supervisor. Now, this is very interesting because a fellow teacher who I know very well said that he first went to his principal and she said that, well, this money's not for our school. We're not a Title I school. And when he told me that, I said, this is not, you don't have to be Title I school. This money is for the whole district. So everybody's going to get a piece. Well, lo and behold, he went back and sure enough, she was thrilled to learn that indeed, because he showed her from material where he had learned a little bit more about it, that her school was going to be able to qualify not only for funds for education for it within music, but all kinds of other revenues that she would be able to use across the whole school curriculum. So it's kind of a quandary. It's like, it depends on the relationship you have with your supervisor, but I'm all in favor of following the chain of command. I think that's respectful and it's the right thing to do. And when you go and speak to your supervisor or your principal, I think, again, there are three different things that I would want to share with them. And so I'd like to go over this and maybe at the end of the weekend, once you've had a chance to review more of this material, you could either write an email or call or Zoom with your supervisor to have a little chat about these three things. One, just make that statement, if you're going to send an email, that you've recently become aware that there is considerable federal funding through ESSER to help return the kids to a safer in-person learning opportunity and address what we've been saying over and over, the needs of the students, including their social, emotional, and mental health needs, particularly the students who have been affected more than others. The second thing is, these funds are permitted to be used for, and if you're writing this email, you would sort of like write in whatever works for you of those 15 things Bob talked about, those uses. It could be reducing the risk of virus transmission and exposure to environmental health hazards. And then you could also speak about the NFHS, the National Federation of State High School Associations research projects, because they have just been so helpful. So you might want to review what are those, what are they recommending, and then how would those items fit within the uses that are being funded. Because they will provide significant guidance to help mitigate, all the aerosol spread during the classes in music. And I come to find out, poor vocal teachers, they've been really slammed because it's just been such an awful whole year for them that they've had so many bad press items come out. But as it turns out, the people who are singing are not putting out any more dispersants than brass players or wind players when you're wearing masks. And so you have to find all this out by reading through the materials, which Bob has placed in the drive. So I wanted to be sure about that you had that. And also just very, very recently, and this is such great news, the information that NFHS has been securing from UC Boulder and also from the University of Maryland has now come out in a peer-reviewed article. And so that information is also available that you could share with your principal. And I believe Lisa may be even putting this in the chat, but I've provided a hard copy of that in the drive, along with the ESSER or the information from the mitigation study, the most recent PR that came out from the folks at the NFHS about the all of those dispersants and how they can be mitigated. So this information is available for you. Download it. So that's the second thing you would want to say, maybe in a second paragraph. But the third thing you might want to say, in consideration of the above, I would like to meet with you, and could we get together to discuss, or could I meet with the performing arts team, or maybe you want to serve on a district committee of some kind to get involved in how can we access these funds to provide a safer return to music for the kids. And why is that? Because they need us. They need what we have to give. It's so important that we actually get the kids back within our classrooms. And I've heard from teachers who say when the kids have come back, they just start crying because they're so happy to see each other and they're just overwhelmed by the experience. And we have that. So we have that to give. So I just wanted to share all of that and have you just remember that, and if we could look at the next slide, that in the model of the superintendents, where they have to solicit information from their community, maybe the music teachers or the music educators in a department or music educators in a whole district could get together and solicit information from the community. And even one of the administrators could sit on this committee. Maybe it's your administrator to help you, guide you through the process. Colleagues, obviously, parents, they want their kids to be safe. Community partners, one of the things that people I think we should join hands with are the people who are in the arts councils, the local arts councils, because they have so many artists who are out of work, and maybe they can come and help us with putting our programs back together as we rebuild, because that's what we're going to have to do, is a rebuild and not look the other direction and, oh, poor me, but we've got to put it back together, put our pedal to the metal and get those butts in seats, especially those young kids, those new kids who haven't yet had a chance to study music. So let's go to the next one, if we could, to the next slide. I wanted to tell you about a couple of districts which have actually already gone ahead and gotten some funding. And I wanted to share a Facebook post because it's just amazing. And you'll love this. This is from Grants Pass High School in Oregon. Last week, we were given $375,000 to purchase instruments for the high school and 2 middle school band programs in our district. It isn't every day that we get to purchase, wait for this, 18 French horns, 13 tubas, 9 marimbas, 6 bassoons, 6 oboes, 6 bari saxes, and a myriad of other instruments for the program that we have needed for so many years. You know what I mean? The district also purchased a 1,500 square foot, that's 30 by 50 canopy tent for outdoor band practices. How did this happen? Last August, we put in a request with the district to replace many of our decades old instruments and bolster our inventory so that students would not have to share horns. Hear me again, would not have to share horns. We thought there was a possibility that relief funds could help in this situation, and to our amazement, it has happened through the latest round of ESSER 2, that was the second one that passed in December, funding that our district received. The ESSER relief funding didn't directly purchase the instruments, but it allowed the district the flexibility to fund our request. Now, that's how Grants Pass used that. And what a wonderful thing. Those 3 schools got together, submitted one request, made the plan, worked it all out, and got all those instruments. And when you think about those instruments, what I so love about them is that they're the larger instruments, a great return on investment, because you won't have to replace those instruments for many, many, many years to come. So it was really a smart thing to go in that direction. So that's just one example. Another thing I want to share with you is about the summer learning procedures. I think this is just so great because in Dayton, for example, I'll give you a couple examples here. Dayton, Ohio is funding a summer learning project. And one of them is a 2-week afternoon percussion camp. And it includes 2 out-of-district percussion consultants. So they're even using money to bring in experts in their field. One is on drumline and one will be doing steel band. And I think it's just so exciting that Dayton, which is rebuilding their program, is looking forward to using this funding to help these kids re-engage with music making and get excited about going back to school. I also want to mention that my home school district, Clark County School District, I'm so excited about this, just recently announced that the school district is going to hold all through the month of June a enrichment program where the students can come for the month, and this is free to the students. It's at no expense whatsoever. The teachers who are participating in this enrichment program are going to get their full pay, their regular daily rate of pay to teach in the program. And if this were me, I would be all about recruitment and retention. So a couple of real quick things, and then I'm going to turn it back to Mary. This would be a great opportunity to partner with your colleagues. For example, if you're a middle school band director, with your high school band director, your elementary band director or music educator, get together and put together like a whole big music event, a music learning opportunity, and bring as many kids in as you possibly can. And get them started. The most important thing we can do for this year is start more kids. Engage the local arts councils to maybe get some help from other kinds of professional musicians who could help you with this. Put on a musical. That might be something really fun and different. Use your current students as camp counselors to keep them engaged in learning. And the other thing I want you to just remember that parents will be thrilled to have their kids out of their hair for a whole month. Think about it, for free. And we should be thrilled to have them and get involved. This is being involved in the process and being grateful. Obviously, volunteer to do whatever you can at your school, do a drum circle, have a welcome back boulevard with your percussion students to welcome all the kids back to school on their first day, have an assembly, keep your administrator informed, smile a lot because it makes a difference when people see you, and it makes a difference for you as well, and say thanks because people are looking after working really, really hard over this past year. Just say thanks and be grateful for all the things they've done. Being a principal is a tough job. Oh my gosh, not one I would want to have, but nonetheless, we need to support them as well. So I think we're about all done with my part. Mary, I want to toss it back to you, and thank you so much for everything that the two of you and Kelly for doing this session. I really appreciate everything you've had to share with our directors tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Marcia. You've given us so much information and great things to think about and important things to do. And that's the most important thing now. We have a lot ahead of us, and there's things that we really need to do. And I hope that you've had some inspiration. One of the one chart that we posted for you all, which was the ESSER 3 or the CARES 3 ESSER funds, the large pool of funding. That could be a great first document that you actually took into a meeting or shared with a colleague. You say, are you aware? We need to be aware. We need to be aware of these funds. I think I'm just repeating, Marcia, what your call to action. We need to dig in and have that basic awareness. And it's not the nitty gritties of the way the state education department are going to be allocating and putting all the numbers together. But just that chart that shows what your state is giving, and now there's information from your state education department of what your district is getting. That is the place to start with that awareness with your supervisor, with the principal, with your colleagues, and just say it's not replacing funds. It's not taking away. We have to take this money and not use other. It is a separate designated pool of funding, so that's important. So talk within your administration, your principal, your supervisor, your boss, your network, people who are care about your program and your network. And ultimately, you need either probably as a small working group or a team to sit down with your federal programs officer or your assistant superintendent in charge of grants. Some states are calling these grants. They really aren't grants. They're not competitive grants. It's just a pass-through of money that will have some planning and guidelines around it. And yes, have a plan. You're developing a plan. And this is when I say as Marcia said, this is, and Bob has said too, it's not just how do I keep my standard operation going? This is a chance for you to say, how do I change music education where I live and work? How do I include a mariachi program? How do I bring strings back to the elementary grades? How do I have a ukulele program, a modern band program, an AP theory program, a composition program, a technology, a recording studio program? This is a time to really think, what are the needs of this age and at this time? We know it's a complex time in our world for the kids that are coming up in this time, for their creativity, their social outlets, their needs to connect through music and the arts and arts learning. This is the time for you to go way back to some of your philosophical underpinnings and say, what did I always want to do with my music education program? Maybe it's having a beginning band program in high school. I always thought that would be a great thing to have. Yes, all the intergalactic honors bands, yes, but have that experience where it was truly open to every student. And I also say, this hands-on music learning is so transformative for every child. So creating more music learning opportunities, that's in your hands. And that's, I think if you took those ideas to a school leader, to an administrator, as a group, and said, we want to increase the engagement of students by X percentage within the next 3 years. Yes, these funds will sunset, but that program is going to have such dramatic support. It will again be part of this music education renaissance and education renaissance that I think these funds can provide. This is truly a once in a generation infusion of funding for education in the United States of America. And we are here today, and it is our opportunity to do the absolute greatest we can for every child that you've been seeing online and every child that's going to be coming back into your classroom so ready and so needing to make music again. So I thank you all. I thank my very beloved colleagues who I continue to learn so very much from every day. And to all of you, and I can't wait to get back to the Midwest Clinic. Holy mackerel, I can't wait.
Me too.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Marcia, Mary, and Bob. We do have a few questions, and some of them you've answered already in the chat, but I'm gonna go ahead and ask them now too, so that we catch them on the recording for anybody who views this later. One of the questions was about additional teachers that are hired during this time period with ESSER funding. Will that funding continue after 3 years?
Well, no, those funds, this is one-time expenditure. And so I think that, how funds are used to kind of surge faculty into places of need. I think that those teachers, once they're in, can then demonstrate the ability to help grow and expand the program. And as numbers increase, then the opportunity to then keep them on will come into play. But I wouldn't go into this thinking, okay, when we do this, we're going to have them forever. It's really about what can we do with the resources now that will have the greatest return and impact on our students.
Mm-hmm. And Kelly, real quickly, on the reverse, where a principal has come to someone and says, I'm going to need you to teach something else, for example, this year, because maybe you don't have enough to fill a great way to use this would be for you to use one of your class periods to travel to your feeder program and work with the kids who are going to be coming to you next year. Because if you have an articulation period, you will grow from below, so to speak, where the kids are coming up, they'll get to know who you are, makes the transition going into the next level so much easier, even high school to middle school. I mean, that's another great opportunity to use that time just for one period. That doesn't cost very much, and it will yield tons of kids.
And I think this is also the time to, like I said before, to think about the configurations of teaching that maybe you thought, oh, if only we could fill in the light, We actually did this with some Title IV funding, happened with some school districts up in Connecticut, where they sat together and said, how are we going to solve the one problem with our beginners, that they do so well when they have some individual attention, but they never get individual attention. Exactly. So the whole district, instrumental staff sat down together and said, well, why don't we have a series, use our Title IV, apply for the money, use our Title IV funding. This is just an example of using extra money. And let's do these series of SWAT weekends. SWAT, so the entire instrumental staff would go from school to school to school for entire days. And yes, everyone agreed to the pullouts. And then they did this individualized instruction for like 4 or 5 weeks, days across a semester, and by the end of that semester, the kids are playing at middle school levels. Yeah, I mean, because they got instructionally what they need, and it's like a way to turn the whole thing on its head a little bit, and really look at what music education can do. And what's that going to generate? That's going to generate more support for the program. I mean, it's like great work, great programs generate a lot of support. So.
Right, thank you. Another quick question. We know that the CARES Act 1 and 2 have already passed. Do we know when the 3
it's passed? It's passed.
Do you know when it'll be allocated?
Some of it is out already, I believe.
Yeah, it's out already. It's in your state education department. They've held back a percentage, I think we just heard about that today. They're holding back a percentage that will be given to the states, as soon as the states put together a plan. So it's there. All right. Don't take no for an answer.
and we've seen in certain states where they've said, okay, these funds will be in your district by June, or maybe 2/3 are there in June and the last third will be there in November. Every state's a little bit different, but the third tranche of funding from the American Rescue Plan, that's the last funding that's coming down the pipeline. 1 and 2 are probably in district already.
Mm-hmm.
And that was by statute. That was written into the law that this wasn't going to be a long, laborious process on the federal side to write all sorts of rules. 60 days out the door to the states.
Right. Mhm.
And that's true of the governor's money, and that's true of the state localities money, and that's true of the county money. So, I mean, it's this, we're just talking the education wedge here.
Right. And the other thing I learned today was that every 6 months, there will be a review of the spending. So for example, someone even said yesterday, if you get told no, go back in 6 months, because it could be that in 6 months, the things have changed so that you will be able to access funds. Just don't give up on this. I mean, this is a huge, huge amount of funding. Huge.
And I see the note, Kelly, I don't mean to jump in. I see the note from Kevin Fallon about Texas.
Oh, yeah.
And I guess I would say Bob asked the same question. Is that a proposal, or is that past the state legislature, or where? Because it's interesting. I haven't read that section of the relief funding, but this is not to this is not to supplant money. This is to supplement what the state is funding. So if that's factual, boy, better call Bobby Floyd. There's a lot of work to do there.
Yeah, no kidding.
To let everybody on the recording know, Kevin was asking about if there was money that was being, the state legislature reduced the educational budget by the exact amount allocated to them by the CARES Act. So that's what they're referring to when they're talking about supplanting and getting, on the stick about contacting your legislatures, because that's not what this is intended for. Correct.
Right.
All right. Well,
I have to find the fine print on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, if that's true. If that's true, we
Yeah,
have a
I've
fine
heard
print
this
on
also.
that.
yeah. Well, I just want to thank you all again for sharing all this information. It's extremely helpful. I know that this can be quite daunting and overwhelming when you're talking about this new legislation coming through, but this is a wonderful resource for educators. And I thank you again so much for sharing these insights. And we hope everybody has a lovely rest of their school year. We look forward to hopefully seeing everybody in December in person at the Midwest Clinic. Yeah. It's getting back to some normalcy, if you will. So thank you, everybody. Have a great evening.